The civil courtroom is packed. Elena Vance, a 32-year-old billionaire, sits paralyzed as her legal team abandons her mid-trial. The media whispers, "She's finished." Outside the heavy oak doors, Elias Thorne, a 42-year-old janitor, quietly pushes his cleaning cart. When Elena walks out in a panic, she drops her case file. As papers scatter, Elias kneels to help. He glances at a single page of complex logistics and whispers, "They're attacking the timeline." Elena freezes. Looking past the faded blue uniform for the first time, she sees a sharp, analytical gaze. The janitor wasn't just cleaning, he was calculating. Elias Thorne was a man of quiet habits and deep, hidden foundations. At 42, his life was a delicate balancing act between the humming silence of the city's legal library and the rhythmic squeak of his mop on the courthouse floors. He was a single father to a bright 12-year-old boy named Toby, who was the sun around which his entire universe revolved. Elias's hands were calloused, not just from the handles of industrial cleaning equipment, but from a life spent rebuilding what had been broken. Every morning started at 5 a.m., the cold, pre-dawn air biting at his lungs as he prepared Toby's breakfast, ensuring the boy's uniform was crisp and his mind was ready for school. 20 years ago, Elias had been a star student at a top-tier law school. He had a brilliant mind for civil procedure and a passion for the nuances of contract law. Professors whispered that he was a once-in-a-generation talent, a man who could dismantle a witness with a single, surgical question. But life, as it often does, had other plans. In his second year, his wife, Sarah, was diagnosed with a rare, aggressive illness. The medical bills piled up like a mountain, and the time required for her care meant his studies had to be sacrificed. He walked away from his degree to become a caregiver, a laborer, and eventually, a widower. He never finished those final credits. He never sat for the bar. He became a ghost in the halls of justice, a man who knew the law better than most who practiced it, but who was invisible to the people who walked past him. He watched young, arrogant lawyers strut through the halls, their expensive briefcases filled with half-baked arguments, and he felt a phantom ache in his chest for the life that was stolen. In the small apartment they shared, surrounded by stacks of borrowed books, Toby would often see his father hunched over old, dog-eared law texts late at night, the yellow light of a desk lamp illuminating his focused features. The boy would ask, "Dad, why don't you go back to school? You're smarter than the people on TV." Elias would always give the same gentle, tired smile, patting Toby's head and saying, "Maybe one day, son. For now, we focus on your school. Education is the only thing they can't take away from you once you've earned it." He didn't carry bitterness. He carried a quiet dignity that was more powerful than any title. He spent his weekend afternoons at the library, not just cleaning, but devouring the latest journals, staying current on every Supreme Court ruling and legislative shift. On the other side of the glass was Elena Vance. At 32, she was the founder of Vital Path, a medical technology company that was on the verge of revolutionizing early cancer detection. She was a visionary, a woman who had fought through a male-dominated industry to build something that actually mattered. She had spent years in labs and boardrooms, sacrificing her personal life for a mission she believed in. But her success had made her a target for the hungry wolves of Silicon Valley. A former lead investor, a ruthless man named Julian Vane, had filed a massive breach of contract lawsuit against her. He was claiming that Elena had violated their original agreement before an amendment was signed, seeking to seize control of her patents and effectively destroy her life's work. This lawsuit was an existential threat, a dark cloud hanging over the thousands of employees who relied on her vision. Elena had hired the best legal team money could buy, a firm known for its aggressive tactics and impeccable track record. But as the trial approached, she felt a growing sense of disconnection. Her lawyers were focused on high-level strategy and media optics, treating the case like a public relations battle rather than a search for truth. They seemed to be missing the intricate details of the internal data that proved her innocence, dismissing her technical explanations as too granular for a jury. They treated her like a figurehead rather than the person who had actually written the code and built the company from the ground up. Then came the disaster that sent her world spinning into a vacuum. Just 24 hours before the most critical phase of the trial, her lead counsel abruptly withdrew, citing a sudden conflict of interest with a subsidiary of Julian Vane's empire. It was a calculated strike, a masterstroke of corporate sabotage designed to leave Elena defenseless and panicked in the middle of the proceedings. The judge, a man known for his strict adherence to the schedule, refused to grant a long postponement, allowing only a few hours for a replacement to get up to speed. The legal world was buzzing with the scent of blood. The vultures were circling in the gallery. Elena was standing in the corridor of the courthouse, feeling the walls close in and her breath catching in her throat, when her folder hit the floor and a man in a janitor's uniform changed the course of her life with 4 simple words. "They're attacking the timeline." Elena stared at the man crouched before her, the fluorescent lights of the hallway reflecting off his balding temples. His uniform was worn and smelled faintly of pine cleaner and old paper. But his eyes were sharp and incredibly observant, devoid of the hollow look she expected from a laborer. He wasn't looking at her with the pity or the hunger she saw in the eyes of the reporters. He was looking at the documents with a technical, analytical focus that she usually only saw in her top engineers. "You understand this?" she asked, her voice a mix of disbelief and desperation, her heart hammering against her ribs. Elias stood up, handing her the neatly stacked papers, his movements precise and calm. "I read," he replied simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "The defense is focusing on the period between October 12th and November 4th. They are claiming the breach occurred during that window, effectively bypassing the protection of the amendment you signed in December. They are betting on the fact that your records for those 3 weeks are disorganized or missing, creating a vacuum they can fill with their own narrative of negligence." Elena felt a jolt of electricity, a sudden clarity amidst the fog. He was exactly right. That had been the focus of the morning's cross-examination, a relentless barrage of questions about server logs and internal communications. Her previous lawyers had struggled to provide a coherent rebuttal, getting lost in the weeds of corporate policy. "How do you know that?" she pressed, her eyes widening. "I've been cleaning this courtroom for 5 years, Ms. Vance," Elias said quietly, his voice a steady anchor in her storm. "I hear the arguments through the doors. I see the patterns in how they manipulate the exhibits. And when I'm at the library, I look up the precedents. Clause 14.2 of your contract has a specific provision for negotiation periods that they are ignoring. If you can prove there was an email confirmation of a renewal during that time, not just a signed contract, but an intent to renew, their entire argument for breach falls apart like a house of cards." Elena looked at him. Really looked at him. She saw the law books in his backpack, their covers worn and pages marked with colorful tabs, and the way he held himself, not like a man who was defeated by his station, but like a man who was waiting for a chance to exert his true self. She realized that the most valuable asset she had wasn't sitting at the counsel table. He was standing right in front of her with a mop in his hand. "I don't even know your name," she whispered. "Elias," he said, his expression softening slightly. "Elias, I need someone who actually understands the truth of this case, not someone who just wants to win a trophy for their firm's lobby," Elena said, her mind racing with a newfound hope. Would you look at this with me? Not as a lawyer, but as someone who sees the gears turning beneath the surface? They moved to a quiet stone bench in the far corner of the hallway, a forgotten alcove away from the prying eyes of the press and the frantic energy of the courtroom. For the next hour, the billionaire and the janitor were two minds working in perfect, silent synchronization. Elias pointed out logic gaps that her million-dollar legal team had overlooked, identifying inconsistencies in Julian Vane's testimony. He showed her how the defense was using shadow dates to confuse the jury. "Can you represent me?" Elena asked suddenly, the idea striking her with the force of a revelation. She didn't care about the optics anymore. She cared about the truth. Elias shook his head slowly, a sad but firm smile touching his lips. "I can't practice law, Ms. Vance. I don't have the license, and the court would never allow a janitor to step into the well. I am, as everyone says, just a janitor. But I can help you prepare the ammunition. I can show you where the trapdoors are hidden in their questioning. I can give your new lawyer the map they need to survive the afternoon and turn this around." The legal reality was harsh, but the emotional connection was undeniable. Elena realized that for years, she had walked past people like Elias every day, never acknowledging their existence, never imagining the wealth of knowledge hidden behind a uniform or a service cart. She had lived in a world of titles, status, and prestige, but it was a man who scrubbed floors who was offering her the only lifeline that actually had the strength to hold her. She felt a profound sense of humility as she realized that her salvation didn't lie in a penthouse boardroom with leather chairs, but in a dusty, sun-streaked courthouse hallway. The 2-hour lunch recess felt like a frantic, high-stakes war room compressed into a vacuum, while Elena's junior associate, a young, panicked man named Marcus, who had been thrown into the deep end without a life vest, tried to gather himself. Elias was the one who provided the structure. He sat at the end of the table, his presence grounding and authoritative without ever raising his voice. He helped Elena reorganize the timeline, highlighting the specific emails that proved the amendment was already in progress during the alleged breach period. He didn't use flashy legal jargon. He used cold, hard, undeniable logic. "Focus on the intent of the parties," Elias instructed Marcus, who was scribbling notes as if his life depended on it. "The law cares about the meeting of the minds. If you show that Julian Vane was already benefiting from the new terms in October, receiving reports he wasn't entitled to under the old contract, he can't claim those terms didn't exist until December. He's trying to have his cake and eat it too." When the session resumed, the atmosphere in the courtroom was electric, the air thick with the scent of old wood and nervous sweat. Julian Vane sat with an air of smug triumph, leaning back in his chair as if he had already won. But as Marcus began to speak, his voice gaining confidence as he followed the precise notes Elias had scribbled on the margins of Elena's folder, the tide began to turn. He presented a series of internal memos and date-stamped communications that Elias had flagged, documents that had been buried deep in the discovery files. The defense team's confident smiles began to falter, replaced by furrowed brows and frantic whispers. Julian Vane started shifting in his seat, his eyes darting toward his lead attorney. Elena sat at the table, watching the proceedings through a new lens. Every few minutes, she would glance toward the back of the courtroom, near the exit. Elias was standing there, his mop bucket nearby, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. He wasn't in the spotlight, and he wasn't taking credit, but he was the architect of every move her lawyer made. He was a silent guardian, a man whose presence provided a sense of security Elena hadn't felt in years. She watched him watch the law, not as a bystander, but as a master observing a craft he had been denied the right to practice. During another short break, As the judge deliberated on a particularly thorny motion about the admissibility of an email, Elena stepped out to find Elias. She found him in the empty witness room, looking out the window at the city skyline, the late afternoon sun casting long golden shadows across his face. "We're winning," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "The judge is actually listening. Their timeline is crumbling before their eyes." Elias didn't turn around immediately. "The truth has a way of asserting itself when someone bothers to look for it beneath the noise," he said softly, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "Why are you doing this, Elias?" Elena asked, coming to stand beside him. "Why are you working as a janitor when you have a mind that could run circles around every partner in that room? You could be a king in this city." Elias turned to face her, and for the first time, she saw the true depth of the pain and resilience in his eyes, a lifetime of what-ifs and almosts. "Because life doesn't pause for unfinished degrees, Elena. When my wife got sick, the law books didn't matter anymore. Keeping her comfortable and then keeping my son fed became the only priority. By the time I could think about going back, the world had moved on. They don't hire 40-year-olds with half a degree for associate positions at big firms. They hire them to clean the floors and stay out of the way." Elena felt a lump in her throat, a sharp pang of guilt. She thought of the signatures she had signed to let people go, the restructuring plans she had approved without ever looking at the names or the stories behind them. She realized that Elias was a victim of the very system she had spent her life perfecting. A system that prioritized efficiency and credentials over raw talent and humanity. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words feeling inadequate. "For all the times I walked past you and didn't see the man behind the uniform." Elias shook his head, a ghost of a smile appearing. "Don't be sorry. Just be different. When you go back in there and you win this case, and you will win, don't just save your company, save your soul. Remember that the people who clean your office have stories too. They have lives and dreams, and sometimes they have the answers you're looking for but were too blinded by status to see." The emotional peak of the moment was interrupted by the bailiff's loud call to return to court. Elena walked back in with her head held high, her spine straight. She wasn't just a billionaire fighting for her fortune anymore. She was a student who had just received the most important lesson of her life from a man she had once considered invisible. She looked at Julian Vane, not with fear, but with a cold, clear pity. The trial didn't end that day with a cinematic gavel strike and a sudden, weeping confession. Real law is a slow, grinding process of attrition. However, the evidence Elias helped uncover had fundamentally shifted the momentum of the case. The media narrative changed overnight from the fall of Elena Vance to the sabotage of Vital Path. Julian Vane's slam dunk lawsuit was now being described as a desperate, manipulative overreach by a jealous investor. Over the next few weeks, Elena stayed in touch with Elias. She didn't offer him a mountain of cash as a thank you, because she had come to know him well enough to know he would refuse it out of pride. Instead, she started visiting the local legal library where he worked his part-time shifts. She would sit at a corner table, pretending to read, but mostly watching him help Toby with his homework between assisting patrons with their research. She saw the way he treated every person who walked through the door, from the homeless man seeking legal aid to the law student struggling with a brief, with the same unwavering respect. One afternoon, she watched Elias explain a complex principle of civil rights to Toby using a deck of cards and a simple analogy. The boy looked at his father with such pure, unadulterated admiration that it brought tears to Elena's eyes. Elias caught Elena's eye and gave a small, respectful nod, but he didn't stop his lesson. He wasn't looking for a reward. He was just living his life, consistent and true. "Knowledge doesn't disappear with a uniform, does it?" Elena said, as she walked over after he finished. Elias smiled, a genuine, warm expression. "No, it just waits for the right moment to be useful. We don't waste what we learn, Toby. We just store it until the world is ready to hear it." The metaphor was clear to Elena. Knowledge, like a seed, can sleep in the dark for a long time, buried under layers of toil and invisibility, but it never loses its potential to grow. Elena realized that Elias's life wasn't a tragedy of wasted potential. It was a testament to endurance and the quiet power of a mind that refused to be dimmed by circumstances. A month later, the judge delivered the final ruling in a crowded courtroom. Vital Path was cleared of all charges. The court found that Julian Vane had acted in bad faith and had deliberately suppressed evidence of the negotiation period. Not only did Elena keep her company and her patents, but Vane was ordered to pay significant damages for his frivolous and malicious litigation. The courtroom erupted in whispers, but Elena remained still, her eyes fixed on the empty space at the back of the room where Elias usually stood. The victory was massive, a total vindication. Elena's stock price soared to new heights, and she was hailed as a hero of the tech industry, a symbol of resilience. But the celebration she held wasn't at a five-star hotel with champagne and celebrities. It was a quiet dinner at a small, greasy spoon diner near the courthouse, with Elias and Toby. She watched Toby eat a huge burger with a side of fries, his face lit up with a joy that no stock price could ever buy. "You did it, Ms. Vance," Toby said, his mouth half full. "My dad said you were really brave in there. He said you stood up for what you built." "I wasn't brave, Toby," Elena said, looking directly at Elias, her voice thick with emotion. "I was just lucky enough to have someone show me the way when I was lost in the dark. Your father is the most brilliant legal mind I've ever met, suit or no suit." Elias looked down at his coffee, stirring it slowly, a modest flush appearing on his cheeks. "I just read the fine print," he said humbly, his voice barely a whisper. Most people are too busy looking at the big picture to notice the details where the truth actually lives. I've had a lot of time to practice looking at the details. As the dust settled on the trial, Elena made a decision that surprised the entire corporate world and sent shockwaves through the legal community. She didn't just go back to business as usual. She announced the creation of the Vital Path Legal Advocacy Fund, a program designed to provide high-quality legal defense for small startups and individuals being bullied by larger corporations, a way to ensure that the little guy had a voice. But the most significant change was much more personal and quiet. She invited Elias to her office, the one with the floor-to-ceiling glass windows that overlooked the entire sprawling city, a vista of ambition and glass. He arrived in a simple button-down shirt and clean jeans, looking more at home in the high-altitude boardroom than he ever had in his janitor's uniform. He didn't look impressed by the luxury. He looked at the books on the shelves with interest. "I want you to be my internal legal advisor, Elias," Elena said, sitting across from him, no desk between them this time. "I'm not offering you a job because I owe you a debt. I'm offering it to you because I need someone who understands the human cost of every contract we sign. I need someone who can see the traps before we walk into them, someone who knows that justice isn't just about winning, but about doing what's right." She also placed a thick, heavy envelope on the table. "And this is a sponsorship, not a gift, but an investment in the future of the law. It covers the tuition and the bar exam fees for you to finish your degree at your old school. They've already agreed to credit your previous years after I spoke with the dean about your work on my case. You can work for me while you finish. Toby deserves to see his father stand in that courtroom with a suit on, not just because of the suit, but because the world finally sees what I see." Elias looked at the envelope, his hand hovering over it, his fingers trembling slightly. He didn't reach for it immediately. He looked at Elena, searching her face for any hint of pity or charity. He only found a profound, unwavering respect. "I won't take it as a favor, Elena," he said firmly, his voice regaining its strength. "I want to earn it. I want to take the exams like everyone else. I want to prove that I belong there on my own merits, not because of a billionaire's influence." Elena nodded, her eyes shining with pride and a deep understanding. "I wouldn't have it any other way. You're the one who taught me that value isn't given. It's recognized. I'm just recognizing it." The final scene of the story takes place a year later, on a crisp autumn morning. The camera pans across the same courthouse steps, where Elias once pushed a cleaning cart in the shadows. But this time, the man walking up the front steps is different. Elias Thorne is wearing a well-tailored charcoal suit, his stride confident and purposeful, his head held high. He isn't carrying a mop. He's carrying a briefcase filled with the hopes of his first clients. Beside him, Toby is walking with a skip in his step, wearing a small blazer that matches his father's, his face beaming with pride. Elena Vance is standing at the top of the steps, waiting for them, a smile on her face that reached her eyes. She isn't the cold, isolated billionaire she once was. She is a woman who has found a new foundation for her life, one built on respect, humility, and the understanding that everyone has a story worth hearing, regardless of the clothes they wear. As they walk past a young janitor who is busy buffing the marble floors near the entrance, Elias stops for a moment. He looks the man in the eye, gives him a respectful nod, and says, "Good morning. Keep up the good work." The janitor looks surprised for a second, then smiles back, sensing a kinship he can't quite explain, a spark of hope in a long day. They mocked him as just a janitor. But knowledge doesn't disappear with a uniform. He didn't take the spotlight for fame or fortune. He took the case seriously because he knew that in the end, the law is only as strong as the people who have the integrity to defend it from the shadows. He didn't just save a billionaire's company. He saved the belief that justice can be found in the most unexpected places, if only we have the courage to look. And that made all the difference in the world. Elias walked into the courtroom, not to clean the floors, but to speak for those who were once as invisible as he was. He had finally gone back to school, not for the title, but to finish the journey he had started 20 years ago, proving that it's never too late to reclaim your destiny. The ripples of his choice continued to spread, proving that while life might pause your dreams, it can never truly extinguish the fire of a brilliant mind. The bridge between the two worlds was finally repaired, built on the solid ground of truth and the unwavering power of the human spirit. If you enjoyed this story of resilience and hidden genius, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel, High TL Stories. We bring you powerful narratives every day that prove worth is found in character, not just in titles. Join our community for more inspiring tales. See you in the next story.